Paul Morphy, 1837-1884, born into a prominent New Orleans family, is universally considered to be one of the greatest players of all time. He was totally dominant during his very brief chess career, and he was a master of all phases of the game. Morphy is remembered mostly for his brilliant attacking games, but he was also a fine strategist and regularly outplayed his opponents with subtle positional play, not just with his phenomenal tactical mastery. He's one of the earliest chess prodigies and was defeating masters by the age of 10. After graduating from law school at age 17, Morphy dominated the field in the 1857 American Chess Congress held in New York City. Morphy then took Europe by storm, defeating all the top European players in match play during his extended visit to Europe during the years 1858 to 59.
E4, E5, Knight F3, D6, D4, F5.
Paul Morphy was not above playing risky, if not downright bad openings at times, and this dubious advance should lead to trouble against correct play. The problem with F5 is that it neglects development and weakens the king side.
Knight C3.
Another good way to meet this line is bishop C4, E captures D4, knight G5, attacking F7, knight H6, defending the threat, and then castles. Another way to do it would be D captures E5, F captures E4, knight G5, attacking that pawn on E4, D5, and then E6. Mr. Bird's continuation is perfectly good, too, and should lead to a clear advantage for white. F captures E4. This move is also risky. Morphy should have played E captures D4, but I think white also gets an edge with queen captures D4, knight C6, and then bishop B5, pinning that knight and maintaining the queen's centralized position.
Knight takes E4, D5, knight G3.
Knight captures E5 looks tempting, but black looks okay after D captures E4, queen H5 check, G6, knight captures G6, H captures G6, and now white has two choices. Let's say he grabs the rook. Queen captures H8. Black answers with bishop E6, covering his knight on G8 and developing. He should be okay. Let's say white tries queen captures G6 check instead. That looks more dangerous. Black then reacts with king D7. White checks again, queen F5 check, king back to E8. And now if white wants to win, he's got to play queen to E5 check. But then black has the fine response, bishop E6, exclamation point. Good move. White now takes the rook in the corner, queen captures H8. Black then centralizes, queen D5, and I think he's got a good game.
E4, knight E5, knight F6, bishop G5.
Mr. Bird should start to chip away at black's strong center with 8F3. I think white has a small edge after the plausible continuation, bishop E6, F captures E4, D captures E4, and then the pinning move, bishop to G5.
Bishop D6, knight H5.
F3, attacking the center, was again the move of choice. Instead, Mr. Bird violates a basic principle by moving an already developed piece twice in the opening. Now black starts to get the upper hand.
Castle kingside, queen D2.
White must be careful not to open up the a5 e1 diagonal with moves like c4, which will be hammered by bishop b4 check.
Queen e8. g4.
Bird had obviously overlooked Morphy's last move and apparently panics. Bishop captures f6 was better, with the main point being g captures f6, knight captures f6 check, rook captures f6, queen g5 check, rook g6, knight captures g6, h captures g6, queen captures d5, and the position looks roughly even. In the 1800s, players were much more free and loose with material. This was not such a problem. The art of technique was not nearly as advanced as it is today.
Knight takes g4. Knight takes g4. Queen takes h5. Knight e5. Knight c6. Bishop e2. Queen h3. Knight takes c6. B takes c6. Bishop e3. Rook b8. Castle queenside. Rook takes f2.
Morphy launches one of the most spectacular sacrificial attacks ever seen in chess. As beautiful as it is, one should not forget that black is a solid pawn ahead and should win without too much difficulty here with normal play. The chance to sacrifice both a rook and a queen was probably irresistible to Morphy, who, for all his modesty, enjoyed playing to the crowd. But from a purely scientific viewpoint, bishop g4 was a better move.
Bishop takes f2. Queen a3.
Wow, a spectacular second punch. But unfortunately for Morphy, it doesn't end the game at once. Of course, the queen cannot be taken. If b captures a3, black delivers mate immediately with bishop captures a3.
c3. Queen takes a2. b4. Queen a1 check. King c2. Queen a4 check. King b2.
People have debated for years whether Morphy could have won after the correct defense king c1. Probably black should then play bishop f5, when the retreat bishop e1 seems to offer white his best hope. Black can then win some material back with queen a1 check, king c2, e3 check, king b3, e captures d2, rook captures a1, rook e8, but a win is far from certain. Garry Kasparov thinks black is slightly better after the further bishop a6, d captures e1 promoting to queen, rook h captures e1, rook takes e1, rook captures e1, bishop captures h2, bishop b7, bishop e4, bishop captures c6, king f7. Probably slight edge is a good assessment, but I doubt if black can actually win against correct play. Another try for black is bishop f5, bishop e1, e3, queen b2, only move, and then a5, trying to rip open the white king's protection. It looks like white would really have his hands full holding off the attack.
Bishop takes b4.
This can hardly be called a sacrifice because white is forced to soon give up his queen, while also finding his king harassed mercilessly by the remainder of black's forces.
C takes b4. Rook takes b4 check. Queen takes b4. Queen takes b4 check. King c2. e3.
This shot opens up quick access to the b1h7 diagonal and intensifies black's attack.
Bishop takes e3. Bishop f5 check. Queen takes b4. Queen takes b4 check. King c2. e3. Bishop takes e3. Bishop f5 check. Bishop takes e3. Bishop f5 check. King c2. e3. Bishop takes e3. Bishop f5 check. Queen takes e3. Bishop f5 check. King c2. 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 e3. Bishop f5 check. Rook d3. Queen c4 check. King d2. Queen a2 check. King d1. Queen b1 check.
Bird resigned here. White must surrender heavy material, so further resistance was futile. Wilhelm Steinitz, 1836-1900, was the first officially recognized world champion of chess. Born in Prague, Bohemia, he moved to Vienna to pursue his studies. Honing his chess skills in Vienna coffee houses, he soon drew notice as a feared attacking player. Steinitz won matches against many of the world's elite players, including England's Joseph Blackburn and the German great Adolf Anderssen. Steinitz's match victory over Johannes Zukertort in 1886 confirmed his status as the world's top player. In his later years, Steinitz became renowned for his emphasis on sound positional fundamentals and was noted for defending the indefensible. His early years saw him playing in the slashing, take-no-prisoner style that characterized the mid-1800s. This helped Steinitz develop his tactical and defensive skills. The following game, played in the great 1895 Hastings tournament, is one of his best.
e4. e5. Knight f3. Knight c6. Bishop c4. Bishop c5. c3. Knight f6. d4. E takes d4. C takes d4. Bishop b4, check. Knight c3.
Steinitz has chosen a sharp gambit line of the Giuoco Piano.
d5.
This looks like a good move at first sight, but Black soon has problems getting his king to safety. Black should take the proffered pawn with knight captures e4, castles, bishop captures c3, and now the extremely tricky d5, known as the molar attack, represents White's sharpest try for advantage. This variation has been very heavily analyzed over the years, and the current assessment indicates that Black can walk through a minefield of traps and come through with an edge.
E takes d5. Knight takes d5. Castle kingside. Bishop e6. Bishop g5. Bishop e7. Bishop takes d5. Bishop takes d5. Knight takes d5. Queen takes d5. Bishop takes e7. Knight takes e7. Rook e1. f6.
Black hopes to castle by hand by soon playing king f7, followed by rook f e8, and then king g8. Black has also prevented knight e5.
Queen e2. Queen d7. Rook a c1.
A more effective continuation was the centralizing move rook ad1, with one nice point illustrated after king f7, queen c4 check, knight d5, now the thematic shot knight e5 check, f captures e5, d captures e5, and Black cannot meet the two threats of rook captures d5 and e6 check.
c6.
The losing move. Black could have come away unscathed with king f7, when White has no apparent way to get at the temporarily exposed Black king.
d5.
This is a beautiful clearance move that does three important things. First, it pries open the c-file for White's exclusive use. Second, the d4 square is vacated to make room for White's knight. The square d4 will become a launch point for a further violation of Black's territory by the White knight. Finally, Black will no longer have the d5 square available for his own knight.
C takes d5. Knight d4. King f7. Knight e6.
The white knight is incredibly strong here. Black must keep watch now over various weak points in his position. First, he must guard against rook c7.
Rook h c8. Queen g4.
The queen not only attacks g7, but it also lines up on the h3 c8 diagonal, menacing black's queen on d7.
g6.
With g6, von Bardeleben finds a very cunning defense. White has a seemingly simple combination now, but there is a small problem of his back rank. Knight g5 check, king to e8. Black must play this or lose his queen.
Rook takes e7 check. King f8.
What happens if he takes the rook? Well, let's see. If queen takes e7, rook takes c8 check wins a piece. If king takes e7, white wins with queen b4 check, king d8, knight e6 check, either winning a queen or mating. Now if white carelessly grabs the queen, disaster strikes in the form of back rank mate.
Rook f7 check. King g8. Rook g7 check.
The rook is immune from capture. Queen takes g7, rook takes c8 check wins easily, and king takes g7, queen takes d7 is check.
King h8. Rook takes h7 check.
Steinitz has driven the black king across the back rank, and now this move forces it back again. The newly opened h-file is the key to finally clinching the game.
King g8. Rook g7 check. King h8. Queen h4 check.
The star move. Black must finally take the intrepid rook.
King takes g7.
Von Bardeleben was not known for his strict observance of chess etiquette, and at this point he just left the chessboard without resigning. Anyway, Steinitz now announced that he had forced mate in 8 moves.
Queen h7 check. King f8. Queen h8 check. King e7. Queen g7 check. King e8. Queen g8 check. King e7. Queen f7 check. King d8. Queen f8 check. Queen e8. Knight f7 check. King d7. Queen d6 checkmate.
A very pleasing game that featured sacrifices both large and small. The key shot was at clearance sacrifice 17 d5, which set the stage for the final assault on Black's king. Alexander Alekhine, 1892-1946, was one of the greatest attacking players who ever lived. Born to a wealthy aristocratic family in Moscow, he became a strong master by his late teens. In 1914, young Alekhine captured first place in a strong international tournament in Moscow, and then played in the famous St. Petersburg 1914 Grand Masters of Chess tournament, and finished third behind world champion Emanuel Lasker of Germany and Cuban genius Jose Raul Capablanca. Alekhine was interned briefly by the Germans while playing in a tournament in Mannheim, Germany, just as World War I started. He managed to return to Russia and served in the ambulance corps on the Russian-Austrian front. Wounded, he developed his skills as a simultaneous blindfold chess expert while recovering in the hospital. He later accomplished the incredible feat of playing 32 opponents blindfolded, winning 19, losing 4, and drawing 9. In 1927, Alekhine, now a French citizen, defeated Jose Capablanca in an epic match played in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He held his title until defeated by the Dutch math professor Max Euwe in 1935. He won back his crown in 1937 and held the title of world champion until his death in 1946. As a youngster, I was fascinated by the brilliance and deep conceptions of Alekhine. His ideas almost seemed too big for the chessboard. Attack was his forte, and he was a very dedicated student of the game, working harder than most of his peers. Alekhine's opponent in the game we are about to analyze, Emanuel Lasker, 1868-1941, holds the record for the longest reign as world champion. Lasker held the title from 1894, when he defeated Wilhelm Steinitz, until 1921, when he lost to Capablanca. Where Alekhine was a chess artist, Lasker was the practical businessman. He cared about results, not beauty. Extremely tenacious and resourceful, Lasker was the master of refuting unsound attacks. Brilliant attackers like Marshall, Janowski, and Spielman, and others wore themselves out trying to overwhelm the level-headed Lasker. Not surprisingly, Lasker wrote a book called Common Sense in Chess. In the game we are about to examine, we see Alekhine at the top of his game. Lasker was getting on in years, but was still a very tough customer. It is striking how Alekhine powerfully builds up his attack, till a final combinative finale settles matters.
D4, D5, C4, E6, Knight C3, Knight F6, Knight F3, Bishop E7, Bishop G5, Knight B D7, E3, Castle kingside, Rook C1, C6.
Lasker has selected the Queen's Gambit declined against Alekhine's 1d4 opening. The QGD is a very solid classical defense that aims at achieving a stable, weakness-free position out of the opening. The QGD is a little stodgy, but very tough to beat. Usually, white comes away from the opening with greater control of territory, but not much else.
Bishop D3. D takes C4. Bishop takes C4. Knight D5. Bishop takes E7. Queen takes E7. Knight E4.
Here, Alekhine avoids the trade of pieces, which is a standard theme when you have a greater control of space.
Knight 5 F6.
Lasker continues to offer a trade of pieces, but Alekhine again refuses, and settles his knight on a good square within proximity to Black's king.
Knight G3. E5.
Lasker plays the standard freeing break, and the center is aired out. The center will remain the main battlefield, but by piece control, not pawns.
Castle kingside. E takes D4. Knight F5.
This knight becomes a true thorn in Black's side. It is extremely well placed, but efforts to expel the knight might prove more harmful than if the knight stands in place, i.e. the cure is worse than the disease.
Queen D8. Knight 3 takes D4. Knight E5. Bishop E3. Bishop takes F5. Knight takes F5. Queen B6.
A very weak move by Lasker. The queen is not well placed on B6 and basically just becomes part of the scenery. In other words, a potted plant. Her absence from the center and kingside will be quickly and painfully felt.
Queen D6.
This powerful move by Alekhine begins a kingside attack that cannot be parried. The queen will work in unison with the minor pieces to create fatal weaknesses in the enemy camp.
Knight E D7.
Lasker, no doubt regretting his weak 17th move, tries some damage control.
Rook F D1. Rook A D8. Queen G3. G6.
The first breach in black's king position is achieved. Alekhine steps up the pressure by bringing fresh forces to bear on the king side.
Queen g5. King h8. Knight d6.
As we saw in that Steinitz-Bartoleben game, knights planted deep into the enemy's position can be an awesome attacking tool. Alekhine attacks the f7 square now, and forces the black king to again expose himself.
King g7. e4.
A multi-purpose move by Alekhine. The pawn stands ready to support the knight on d6 with e4, e5, and also gets out of the way for a rook lift along the third rank.
Knight g8.
A weak defense by Lasker. The only way to prolong the struggle was with the exchange sacrifice rook d e8, which leads after knight takes e8, rook takes e8, rook c2, rook takes e4, h3, to a better position for white, but one that's not easy to convert to victory.
Rook d3.
Alekhine makes full use of all of his assets. The introduction of the rook to join the hunting party is decisive.
f6.
Knight df6 was the only hope, but white's attack is decisive after rook e1. Then h6, knight f5 check, king h7, rook h3, threats all over the place, g takes f5, forced, e5, look at that black king side, it's a total mess, queen d4, only chance, queen takes f5 check, king g7, rook g3 check, king h8, black's king side looks bullet-riddled, e takes f6, knight takes f6, and now the safety move h3 should give white a decisive advantage.
Knight f5 check. King h8. Queen takes g6.
This beautiful sacrifice is the culmination of Alekhine's well-executed attack. White threatens queen g7 mate, and of course capture of the queen leads to rook h3 check, knight h6, rook takes h6 mate. So of course Emanuel Lasker resigned. Viktor Korchnoi, born in 1931 in Leningrad, is probably the strongest player never to be crowned world champion. He has won over 150 tournaments during his long and eventful career and has defeated most of his rivals in match play, including Tigran Petrosian, Boris Spassky, Mikhail Tal, Bent Larsen, and many others. Korchnoi is best known as a great strategist and counterattacker, but he is no slouch in the direct attack department either, as the following brilliancy demonstrates.
d4, e6, e4, d5, knight d2.
The French defense is a sturdy but often confusing opening that appeals to counterattackers and players with a preference for closed or blocked positions. The pace of the play is slower than a Najdorf or Dragon Sicilian. White has slightly greater control of the center, but black has good counterattacking possibilities. The main drawback from black's point of view is activating his light-squared bishop, which is obstructed by the e6 pawn.
Knight f6, e5, knight f d7, c3, c5, knight g f3.
This may lead to gambit-type play as compared to the more popular variation, bishop d3, knight c6, knight e2.
Knight c6, bishop d3, Queen b6. Castle kingside.
White offers his d-pawn in return for a strong lead in development. The key to the gambit is the position of White's queen. If the White queen can somehow find her way over to Black's kingside, then White should be in very good shape. If not, Black should have no problems at all defending.
C takes d4. C takes d4. Knight takes d4. Knight takes d4. Queen takes d4. Knight f3. Queen b6. Queen a4. Queen b4.
Yudovchich alertly prevents Korchnoi from playing queen g4. A queen's raid, of course, must be avoided by White, so the queen must retreat.
Queen c2. h6.
Not a good move by Yudovchich. This move is just too passive and weakens the kingside besides. Much better was queen c5, giving White the choice between bishop captures h7, queen takes c2, bishop takes c2, with a small edge for the first player, or the more ambitious queen e2, aiming for bishop e3 and rook ac1.
Bishop d2. Queen b6.
If Yudovchich attempts to trade queens with queen c5, Korchnoi could simply then play queen a4, and Black no longer has available that interposition move queen b4.
Rook a c1. Bishop e7. Queen a4.
The queen returns to her post, but this time she is supported by fresh development. Note how Black has trouble dealing with that pin of the knight on d7. If Black tries to break that pin with castles, White has the surprising riff bishop b5, knight c5, rook takes c5. The point being that if queen takes c5, rook c1, queen b6, 20 bishop a5, the Black queen is trapped. After rook takes c5, if Black tries bishop takes c5, that's demolished by bishop a5, bishop takes f2 check, rook takes f2, queen e3, bishop b4, Black's toast.
Queen d8.
Yudovchich had to bring the queen back to the start square for defensive reasons, but from here forward it's clear that White, thanks to all of his aggressively placed pieces and safe king, has a clear advantage.
Rook c2.
Korchnoi doubles his rooks in order to cement his control of the c-file. If Black castles, White sets up a powerful attacking formation with queen g4 threatening bishop takes h6, king h8 forced, rook fc1, b6, b4. Black can hardly move. Black's pieces have very little scope, and White is poised to attack and invade at will on both sides of the board. Yudovchich makes the drastic decision to abandon the plan of castling altogether and moves his king out of the pin.
King f8. Rook fc1. Knight b6. Queen g4. Bishop d7. Bishop a5.
Korchnoi keeps Black tied up by pinning the knight, which also happens to be one of Black's only active pieces.
Rook c8. Rook takes c8. Bishop takes c8. Bishop b4.
Korchnoi seizes the chance to trade off dark-squared bishops and has calculated variations like bishop takes b4, queen takes b4 check, king g8, queen a5 attacking that pawn on a7, a6 meeting that threat, queen takes b6, a nice queen sack, queen takes b6, rook takes c8 check with mate next move.
g6.
Udovchic's only chance was king g8, but white has then a4, bishop d7, bishop captures e7, queen takes e7, a5, driving black's knight to a horrible square, knight a8, only move, and then the centralizing queen d4 gives white a totally dominant position for the investment of one tiny little pawn. Now Victor the Terrible decides the game with a spectacular combinative assault.
Queen h4.
A brutal move by Korchnoi. Suddenly the bishop on e7 is pinned two ways.
g5.
Well, of course, if bishop takes b4, queen takes d8 check, white wins, and bishop takes h4 is illegal. That leaves only the game continuation and king e8 as viable defenses for black. Let's see what happens after king e8. I think that's best answered by the simple queen f4, preparing to strike on the queen side with a2, a4. After queen f4, if black tries to drive the queen away with g5, white says, "Be my guest," and then plays queen d4, happy that black has further weakened his position. Nevertheless, king e8 was probably black's best chance.
Knight takes g5.
Because of the pins of that pawn on h6 and the bishop on e7, that knight is untouchable.
King e8. Bishop b5 check. Bishop d7. Knight takes e6.
This fantastic blow shatters the defenses to black's king. If black now plays bishop takes h4, grabbing the queen, that leads to knight g7 mate. If black plays bishop takes b5, white has a beautiful shot. Knight g7 check, king f8. Check this out, knight f5, incredible. Knight c8, the only move to stay in the game, and then rook takes c8 blows that away. In the game continuation, Korchnoi had to calculate that he could decisively bring up reserves to finish off the attack before black could organize a defense.
F takes e6. Queen h5 check. King f8. Rook c3. Rook h7.
Udovchich tries valiantly to hang on by getting the rook involved with the defense.
Queen g6.
White threatens the crushing rook to f3 check.
Rook g7. Queen takes h6.
Every white move now comes with the force of a sledgehammer. This time the threat is queen h8 check followed by rook f3 check.
Bishop takes b5.
Let's say black plays king g8. That doesn't help at all, because white wins with rook h3, bishop takes b5, the only chance, queen h8 check, driving the black king out, King f7, rook f3 check. We've seen that move before. King g6, rook g3 check. King f5, and now just queen takes g7, and black can resign with a clear conscience.
Rook g3.
Mr. Udovchich resigned when he noted that the best defense, king e8, leads to total, absolute obliteration after rook takes g7, king d7, bishop takes e7. Whew, now that was an attacking game. Robert James Fischer needs no introduction. He is a legend, and rightly so. His records are astounding. He won the U.S. Championship at the tender age of 14, and subsequently won that title 6 more times, including the 63-64 championship with a perfect score of 11-0. Fischer was the consummate fighting player with a demonic will to win that overwhelmed his opponents. He was like a force of nature on the chessboard, sometimes a tornado, sometimes an earthquake, and once in a great while, a fog. In the early 1970s, Fischer went from great to incredible as he topped one amazing feat after another. His 12.5, 8.5 win over Boris Spassky in the 1972 Reykjavik title bout was his crowning achievement, but somehow seems eclipsed by his incredible results of the year before. In 1971, Fischer climbed the heights of chess immortality by defeating grandmasters Mark Taimanov and Bent Larsen in successive matches by the incredible scores of 6-0. These spectacular victories led to a match with ultra-solid former world champion Tigran Petrosian to determine a challenger to Boris Spassky, the reigning world champion at the time. After a slow start, Fischer ended up crushing Petrosian 6.5, 2.5 to set up his famous title match with Spassky. In the opinion of many, including myself, Fischer's win in Game 1 of his match with Bent Larsen is one of the greatest games of all time. Much credit must go to Larsen, who seemed to be matching Fischer blow for blow during the game, only to falter just near the end.
e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, knight e7, a3, bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3, c5.
Larsen has chosen the winnower variation of the French defense, one of the few openings that gave Fischer troubles during his chess career. The positions reached are very imbalanced. White has a strong center and a dangerous pair of bishops, but black has speedy development and good play against white's doubled c-pawns. It has long been a favorite defense of counterattackers, with Victor Korchnoi one of its most outstanding practitioners.
a4.
White hopes to develop his bishop to a3, while also preventing black from setting up a blockade on the a4 square.
Knight b c6, knight f3, bishop d7, bishop d3, queen c7, castle kingside, c4.
This is a very risky move by Bent Larsen. Although he manages to drive back one of the bishops, he's also voluntarily opened up the a3 f8 diagonal. The Danish Grandmaster hopes to attack and diminish white's center before the dark-squared bishop can become active, but Fischer has other ideas.
Bishop e2, f6, rook e1, knight g6, bishop a3.
A very strong pawn sacrifice that gives Fischer a strong initiative.
F takes e5, d takes e5, knight c takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, queen d4.
Classic centralization by Fischer. The queen takes the high ground where she can exert influence in all directions.
Knight g6.
Larsen would like to get his king out of harm's way with castles, but queen takes a7 is just too strong. The strange-looking h5 is more difficult to refute, but I like white after rook b1, knight c6, queen h4, attacking h5, king f7, f4, with play similar to the actual game.
Bishop h5. King f7.
Safer but somewhat joyless for black is the ending that arises after castles, queen captures a7, b6, queen a8 check, queen b8, queen captures b8 check, king captures b8, bishop captures g6, white's best try, h captures g6, bishop e7, rook d8, bishop d6 check, king b7, and now a5 to open up the black king position, b captures a5, rook captures a5, king c6, and now bishop e5. Kind of a long-winded variation, I agree, but all pretty much forced. Only white can win this ending, but black has definite drawing chances. Bent Larsen loves to take risks, and he decided his best chances lay in the middle game.
f4.
Fischer quickly plays to blow open the position in order to energize his range-starved pair of bishops. He plans to punch through black's wall of pawns with f4, f5.
Rook h e8. f5. E takes f5. Queen takes d5 check. King f6. Bishop f3.
I think bishop d6 was more accurate. Black has several alternatives here. Let's take a look at them. First, queen c6. Loses very quickly to queen d4 check, king f7, bishop f3. And black's going to get crushed by a killer check on d5. Second choice, queen b6 loses to bishop c5, queen c7, h4. That sets up a devastating check on d4. The best black can then hope for is the pathetic rook e5, bishop d4. Finally, the apparent best defense after bishop d6 is queen c8, but that leads to a crushing white attack after bishop f3, bishop c6, queen d4 check, king f7, queen takes c4 check, king f6 forced, queen d4 check, king f7, bishop d5 check, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5 check, king f6, and now g4 rips into black's king position with decisive effect.
Knight e5.
Beautiful play by the Danish Grandmaster. Larsen seizes his chance, basing his defense on a powerful counterattack.
Queen d4. King g6. Rook takes e5.
Brilliant blow is met by brilliant blow. Fischer had to see very deeply into the position to judge that he could survive black's coming heavy artillery barrage along the central files. He saw that black's exposed king would allow for a tactical defense at the critical moment.
Queen takes e5. Queen takes d7. Rook a d8. Queen takes b7. Queen e3 check.
Larsen missed the much better queen takes c3, forcing the passive queen b1. In that case, black has rook e5, which gives him a good position thanks to his tremendous centralization. There's that word again.
King f1. Rook d2. Queen c6 check. Rook e6. Bishop c5.
Incredibly, Fischer holds his position together. This fantastic move eliminates the mate threats and forces black to simplify to a difficult endgame.
Rook f2 check. King g1. Rook takes g2 check. King takes g2. Queen d2 check. King h1. Rook takes c6. Bishop takes c6. Queen takes c3.
Probably not best. This move allows Fischer to create a powerful passed a-pawn that can be escorted up the board by the pair of bishops. Better was a5 to stop white from getting a passed pawn.
Rook g1 check. King f6. Bishop takes a7. g5.
Larsen plays the losing move. Queen takes c2 would keep the outcome in doubt, as seen in the variation bishop d5 check, king e7, bishop c5 check, king f6, or a5, queen d3, a6, c3, bishop b7, c2, bishop b6 trying to get that pawn home. Nope, queen d6 stopping, a7, queen takes b6, a8 equals queen, and now queen takes g1 check, and black should draw.
Bishop b6. Queen takes c2. a5.
The passed a-pawn is unstoppable. The bishops not only serve as perfect escorts of the a-pawn, but they ably protect white's king.
Queen b2. Bishop d8 check. King e6. a6. Queen a3. Bishop b7. Queen c5. Rook b1. c3. Bishop b6.
A marvelous game, fascinating in all phases. Fischer was a little hesitant pressing his attack, but soon hit his stride with a spectacular sequence that started with 22 queen d4. This one was a real nail-biter that deserves its rank as one of the great games of all time. Finally, I would like to present one of my own attacking games, which gave me a big boost in my quest to win the 2002 USA Championship. My opponent, the experienced and solid international master Igor Foigl of Boston, fell victim to an inspired but controversial rook sacrifice. I would not bet the house that my sack was technically sound, but I knew it would present very difficult practical problems to solve. Also, this game came early in the tournament. If it failed, I still had enough games left in the schedule to catch up with my rivals.
e4. g6. d4. Bishop g7. Knight c3. c6. Knight f3. d5. h3. Knight f6.
Foigl's choice of opening came as somewhat of a surprise to me. I decided to pull in my horns a little bit at this moment. I was aware that the books recommended e5 here, but I could not remember much beyond that move. Later I learned that white should gain an edge with e5, knight e4, knight takes e4, d takes e4, knight g5, c5, e6, bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, f takes e6, d takes c5. Instead, I played a common-sense developing move.
Bishop d3. D takes e4. Knight takes e4. Knight takes e4. Bishop takes e4. Bishop f5.
I was beginning to think that Mr. Feigl was going to neutralize my opening and steer the game to a draw, but I managed to find a way to keep some kind of initiative going.
Bishop takes f5. Queen a5 check. c3. Queen takes f5. Castle kingside. Knight d7.
Black must be careful not to castle too quickly. If castles, white plays rook e1, e6, rook e5, exclamation point, bishop takes e5, d takes e5, which gives white excellent play for the sacrifice. There are also certain dangers for black by postponing castling, as we shall soon discover.
Rook e1, e6.
This move must be played if black wants to get his king out of the center.
Queen b3.
White manages to keep the initiative. If now rook b8, then queen a3 is very annoying for black, as white prevents castling while also attacking the pawn on a7. Also risky for black is 13 castles queenside, bishop g5, attacking the rook de8, bishop h4, and the bishop will take up a powerful post on g3 to black's discomfort.
Queen b5.
Feigl offers a trade of queens that would pretty much extinguish all winning chances for both sides. I was not interested in a quick draw, so I now went into a long think, about 25 to 30 minutes or so. After judging that a queen trade would lead nowhere, I started examining the possible rook sack on e6. At first I was skeptical. Then I looked deeper and became intrigued. Then I looked a little longer and satisfied myself that I would probably have at least a draw in reserve if I went with the sacrifice. If I didn't do it, I have nothing. One of the key factors that helped me decide was the safety of my own king. Without that innocent little h3 move having been played, I would probably have passed on the rook sack.
Rook takes e6 check. F takes e6. Queen takes e6 check. King d8. Bishop g5 check. King c8. Rook e1.
Calculating the course of the game up to here was easy, but now black has a very wide choice of defenses. Of course, I did not see all of them, but the rook sack was based in large part on intuition. White's attack is very cohesive, and it is not easy for black to organize himself. Black's basic goal of connecting rooks is a long ways off, for instance. The fact that black's minor pieces are unprotected and vulnerable told me that I had to have good chances here. Here is what I think is black's best defense. Queen d5, offering to trade queens. Queen e7, attacking the bishop on g7. Queen g8, I missed that move. d5, a move found later in analysis. Queen f8, again trying to trade queens. D captures c6. B captures c6, forced. Then white plays queen e6, attacking that pawn on c6, which is met by king c7. Bishop e7, attacking black's queen. Queen f5, best. Bishop d6 check, starting to harass the black king. King back to c8, queen c4. Queen b5, forced. Queen f7, keeping up the initiative. Black must then play bishop f6, and now rook e6 gives black a basket full of problems. This is all pretty much forced since move 17. White is still a rook down, but he has 2 pawns and a continuing strong attack to compensate.
Rook f8.
It so often happens when accurate defense is required, an oversight results that settles the game quickly.
Queen e7. King c7.
Feigl probably overlooked that rook takes f3 gets mated by queen d8. Black should have tried rook g8, but then white has the paralyzing rook e6, which threatens simply rook d6 overloading black's tenuous defenses. Black can prolong the game with queen f5, but then rook d6, king c7, only move, bishop f4, great move, king c8 again forced, g4, trying to overload black's queen, bishop f6 counterattacking, queen f7, and now queen b1 check, king g2, rook g7, queen e8 check, bishop to d8, queen e6, threatening rook takes c6 check, forces bishop c7, and now knight g5 leads to a winning game for white.
Queen takes g7. Rook takes f3. Rook e5.
This surprising in-between move prevents queen takes g5 and restores the basic material balance, leaving white with a totally dominating position.
Queen takes b2. G takes f3.
The best black can do here is play the pitiful rook d8, when the simplest conclusion would be d5, there's no hurry to capture black's rook, leading to queen b1 check, king g2, queen d3, best chance, d takes c6, b takes c6, okay, now I'll take that rook, bishop takes d8 check, king takes d8, rook e4, and black has no hope in the position. Feigl decided to resign rather than plod on in such a hopeless situation.